For all buildings under the scope of the order, the responsible person must provide information to residents on the fact fire doorsets should be kept shut when not in use, that residents or guests should not tamper with self-closing devices, and that residents should report any fault or damage to doors immediately to the responsible person. As a responsible person, this means you must also have a clear and effective system to ensure any reports received are acted upon promptly. Whilst it goes without saying that this is necessary to ensure the safety of the building and its residents, it is also likely to help in terms of a provider's wider aims regarding resident satisfaction and engagement. To conduct the checks, the responsible person will need to access the flat so they can see both sides of the door. The guidance is clear that it's up to the responsible person to decide on what the best approach is to engage with residents. And in terms of the actions a responsible person is expected to take, the guidance does say that residents should be encouraged to give access through the provision of information required under the regulations, but also as part of wider resident engagement strategies in place. In the first instance, the responsible person will need to be seen to be encouraging access through their information and messaging, and being flexible in offering appointments. So, for example, appointments at different times of the day or different days of the week. We would expect a similar approach to be adopted as with gas safety appointments. So usually we know that providers will have 3 attempts to arrange access and 3 attempts for sending letters out to do that. At this point, we suggest the need for taking legal action is considered. The primary method of enforcement, regardless as to whether a resident is a leaseholder or a tenant, would be through an injunction. This reflects the general principle that providers should seek to take the least draconian measure first. Whether legal action is appropriate will need to be considered case by case, and the basis for seeking the injunction determined case by case. So it is very difficult today to give very precise advice, but what we can say is that legal route should be seen as a last resort after other reasonable avenues have been exhausted. And actually what you might find is by following a clear process akin to, for example, gas safety, that you don't have to actually get to the stage of issuing for an injunction proceedings. And our housing litigation team tell me that they often find that the mere warning of an injunction is enough for tenants occupiers to allow access as they start to pay attention to the letters that are landing on their doormat.
It's the 6th anniversary in June of the Grenfell Tower. If we forget history, then history has a nasty habit of repeating itself. And the figures and numbers still shocks me. 72 people died in a building in the UK in the 21st century. Of those, 15 of the 37 disabled residents died. Further fatalities occurred because non-disabled people who could perfectly well have evacuated stayed with their neighbours, their friends and their families. If we look at the figures of the numbers of disabled people, 14.6 million disabled people in the UK, 80% of disabilities are hidden. So not all disabled people are actually wheelchair users. And of that 1.2 million estimated number of wheelchair users, 5% of them, only 5% can never leave their wheelchairs. It's also worth remembering that 25% of the children who lived in the tower also died. And the combination of those figures means that 41% of the people who died were vulnerable people. Now, London Fire Brigade have issued a very good guidance note. So a PCFRA is all about protecting and preventing. It's a simple risk assessment, but it is not a PEEP. So if you're looking at preventing and protecting and prevent things like water mist systems, an evacuation plan, a personal emergency evacuation plan, is about an individual resident being able to evacuate to total safety, i.e. outside the building. It is also, for me, almost more importantly, about being able to move away from immediate danger. University of Leeds and Phil Murphy did a very good piece of research into Home Office data going all the way back to 2010, looking at fire rescue services response times. And what it showed was that although we often quote 7.5 minutes as the time that they arrive at a building, it's actually 27 minutes before primary intervention. So a resident who is unable to move away from immediate danger is unlikely to be rescued for 27 minutes. And of course, we had Lord Greenhalgh, a minister of the UK government, announced 1 year ago, in April last year, that it was not possible to have safe, practical and proportionate PEEPs. I would strongly disagree. So the report has to show relevant factors that include ability to self-evacuate, cognitive impairment. So that's the whole range of neurodiversity, and how these arrangements have been communicated with residents in the fire and rescue services. And just remember, it is not the fire and rescue services' legal responsibility to evacuate people. Disabled people and vulnerable residents are very much looking at the building safety regulator in the hope that their needs will be taken into account. And I think it's something that we all need to bear in mind. And I'll leave you with one thought as I finish. If you booked into a hotel, maybe with your family or your partner or your friends, and after you'd booked in, you discovered that every fire door was locked, you had no means of escape, no fire protected lift, how long would you stay in that building? And in the UK, in 2023, there are millions of residents who every day and every night know that if there is a fire, they cannot escape. And this is something that we all need to address as a matter of urgency.
So the Building Safety Act 2022, Part 4 introduces new duty holders, accountable persons and principal accountable persons. There's a degree of complexity of the definition, but essentially it comes down to if you either own or have a repairing obligation for common parts of the building, you're likely to fulfill the definition of an accountable person. If there is only one accountable person for a building, they will also be the principal accountable person. If there's more than one AP, then the PAP, the principal accountable person, will be the AP who has responsibility for the exterior of the building and the structure. So essentially, all PAPs will also be an AP, but not every AP will be a PAP. It defines building safety risk for the purposes of the Act. Now, obviously, there are a lot of things that relate to the safety of a building. I'm sure we've all seen the tragic story of the boy who died as a result of mold in a flat recently. But for the purposes of the Building Safety Act, we are concerned with the spread of fire, and that includes smoke, heat, etc., and structural failure. Those are the two building safety risks that the Act is focused on. It sets out the buildings in scope for Part 4. It needs to be at least 18 metres in height or have at least 7 stories and contain at least 2 residential units to be in scope. And the overarching duty is that accountable persons have to take all reasonable steps to prevent building safety risks and reduce the severity of an incident should it occur. So, just for some context for building assessment certificates, eventually the principal accountable person for every in-scope building will have to apply for building assessment certificate. And we currently expect to start assessing applications from April 2024. Perhaps they'll have to wait to be invited to apply. They cannot nominate themselves, and when invited, they will have 28 days to submit their application. Applications have to include a copy of the latest safety case report, which is the main thing we're talking about today, a copy of the residents' engagement strategy for the building, information about how mandatory occurrence reporting system operates, and a statement confirming that all the accountable persons have supplied relevant information to the people they need to. Safety cases are widely used in other industries, particularly major hazard industries, chemicals, offshore, nuclear, but it's a new concept for building management. Now, the safety case is basically, it's a written record of how you manage the building safety risk defined in the Act. And the level of detail should be proportionate to the risks for the specified building. So for the specific building. So we are very keen to push the message that this needs to be proportionate. This is not about gold plating. This is about, clearly you are going to need more information about an older building or perhaps a large panel system building than you would for a brand new building where you have really good information already and systems in place. So it's proportionate to the risks of the specific building. And if you're managing your building well and you understand the risks, you are probably doing most of what you need to do already. Yes, you'll need to prepare the safety case report and apply for the building assessment certificate, but you will find hopefully that you are actually already doing a lot of what most of what you need to be doing. Now, there's an important distinction to draw here. The safety case is all the information that you use to manage building safety risks. And this information will become part of your building's golden thread of information. So that's the information thread that runs throughout the building's life cycle. The safety case report is a summary of what you have in place that demonstrates that you've taken all reasonable steps to manage building safety risks. And those, just as a reminder, are spread of fire and structural failure. If there's more than one AP for a building, perhaps we're going to need to liaise with the other APs in order to produce that report to make sure that it reflects the entire building. The safety case report will need to contain details of your assessment of building safety risks and what you have in place to manage those risks. And that includes both the physical measures and the supporting management arrangements. So the safety case report needs to make an argument supported by evidence that you've taken all reasonable steps. It's not just a list of control measures or a collection of unlinked reports and assessments, and it should summarize and link to the supporting evidence in the wider safety case for the building as part of that demonstration. So it should neither just simply be a list of reports, nor should it make unreferenced, unsubstantiated claims. It should link the wider evidence into that demonstration. Something I find quite helpful is to memorize to remember the distinction is that the safety case is about information. The safety case report is about demonstration.